That Canadian guy is 7. Dave B Racing is P4. That Canadian guy is P7. The race dictator is 3rd. Wiremu is P6. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is 5th on Supers. Todd is P1. Best lap is a 2:10.784. Wiremu is P6. Chris Burnett is 2nd. Best lap is a 2:12.242. The race dictator is 4th. That Canadian guy is 1st. Best lap is a 2:10.333. Johnny Prince is 6th. Best lap is a 2:13.732. Chris Burnett is P5. Johnny Prince is P7. Jason Short from New Zealand is 8th on Supers. That Canadian guy is second. The race dictator is P4. Best lap is a 2:11.203. Chris Butt is P6. The race dictator is P4 on Supers. Todd is P3. Johnny Prince is P7. Jason Short is 8th on Supers. Best lap is a 3:15.953. The race dictator is 4th. Jason Short is 8th. Todd is P3. Dave B Racing is first. Best lap is a 2:09.822. Jason Short is third. Best lap is a 2:10.763. The race dictator is P5. Todd is P4. The race dictator is 5th. Todd is P3. Best lap is a 2:10.362. The race dictator is P5. Wyremew is 6th. Best lap is a 2:11.966. That Canadian guy is 2nd. Best lap is a 2:10.038. Chris Buddett is 7th. Dave B. Racing is 1st. Chris Buddett is 7th. Wyremew is 6th. Dave B. Racing is 1st. Johnny Prince is 8th. Jason Short is 1st. Best lap is a 2:08.624. Todd is 4th. Jason Short is P1 on Supers. The qualification session is at RT Bathurst. Todd from New Zealand is 20th on Supers. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is P3 on Supers. Dave B. Racing from South Africa is 1st on Supers. That Canadian guy from Canada is fourth on Supers. Johnny Prince is P3. The race dictator from New Zealand is P8 on Supers. Chris Butt from New Zealand is fifth on Supers. The race dictator is P8. Johnny Prince is P4. Jason Short from New Zealand is second, up 0.22 on Supers. Jason Short improved his P1 with a 2:08.947. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is fourth. Johnny Prince improved his P3 with a 2:12.389. 3.442 off pole. Todd is P6. Todd improved his P5 with a 2:11.455. 2.508 off pole. Wiremew is 8th, up 11.95 on Supers. 5 minutes remaining in the session. Chris Butt is 6th, up 0.43. Jason Short is first, up 0.22. Jason Short is provisional pole with a 2:08.111. That Canadian guy is P3. That Canadian guy improved his P3 with a 2:09.791. 1.680 off pole. The race dictator is P5. The race dictator improved his fourth with a 2:09.933. 1.822 off pole. That Canadian guy is third up 0.17. Chris Butt is fifth up 0.18. Jason Short is first up 0.20. Jason Short is provisional pole with a 2:08.001. That Canadian guy is P3. That Canadian guy improved his P2 with a 2:08.820. 0.819 off pole. Wiremew is 8. Wiremew improved his P8 with a 2:12.815. 4.814 off pole. Jason Short is P1 up 0.65. Dave B Racing is P3 up 0.26 on Supers. The qualifying session is now in overtime. Jason Short is first on Supers. Todd is P6 up 0.17. Todd improved his P6 with a 2:11.097. 3.096 off pole. Broadcast bot is P20 on softs. The race session is at RT Bathurst. Jason Short is P1. Dave B Racing from South Africa is second on Supers. That Canadian guy from Canada is third on Supers. 20 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. That Canadian guy lost P3 to the race dictator. Dave B Racing is P2. The race dictator from New Zealand is third on Supers. Dave B Racing is second. Wiremu is P4 on Supers. Dave B Racing is second. Dave B Racing passed Jason Short for P1. The race dictator is P3. That Canadian guy is P5. That Canadian guy passed Wiremu for P4. Jason Short from New Zealand on lap 1 is P3 on Supers, 0.2 behind the race dictator. That Canadian guy is P4. The race dictator is 4th, 0.1 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator is now 6th. The race dictator lost 7th to Todd. Chris Budd from New Zealand is P4 on Supers, 0.5 behind that Canadian guy. Jason Short is second on Supers, 0.7 behind Dave B Racing. Chris Budd is P4, 0.4 behind that Canadian guy. Jason Short is second, 0.4 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is third, 0.4 ahead of Chris Budd. Jason Short is second, 0.5 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is P3, 0.5 behind Jason Short. Jason Short is second. Best lap is a 2:17.325. 4.699 off the fastest lap. 15 minutes remaining in the session. That Canadian guy from Canada is P3, 0.9 behind Jason Short. The race dictator is 6th, 0.5 ahead of Todd. That Canadian guy is P3, 0.2 behind Jason Short. The race dictator from New Zealand is P6, 0.7 behind Wiremute. Wiremute is 5th, 0.4 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator is P6 on Supers, 0.9 behind Wiremute. Wiremute is P5, 0.7 behind Johnny Prince. The race dictator is P6, 0.7 behind Wiremute. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is P5 on Supers, 0.1 behind Wiremute. Johnny Prince was 3.2 faster last lap. The race dictator is P6. Best lap is a 2:12.422. 2.957 off the fastest lap. Johnny Prince is 5th, 0.2 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator on lap 4 is P7, 0.5 behind Chris Budd. The race dictator was 1.0 faster last lap. That Canadian guy is 3rd, 1.5 behind Jason Short. Chris Budd is 6th, 0.7 behind Johnny Prince. Chris Butt was 0.8 faster last lap. Chris Butt lost 6th to the race dictator. Chris Butt lost P7 to Todd. Jason Short is P2. Best lap is a 2:10.363. 0.898 off the fastest lap. That Canadian guy from Canada is P3, 1.0 behind Jason Short. Jason Short is second, 1.0 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy on lap 5 is P3, 1.2 behind Jason Short. Ten minutes remaining in the session. Jason Short is second, 1.3 behind Dave B Racing. That Canadian guy from Canada is P3, 1.5 behind Jason Short. Jason Short is second, 1.7 ahead of that Canadian guy. Wyremew is fourth, 1.1 behind that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is third, 0.4 behind Jason Short. Wyremew is P4, 0.5 ahead of Johnny Prince. Jason Short from New Zealand is second, 0.7 behind Dave B Racing. That Canadian guy is P3, 0.9 ahead of Wyremew. That Canadian guy was 1.7 faster last lap. Jason Short entering the pits is P2. The race dictator entering the pits is P6. Chris Butt entering the pits is P7. Jason Short is P2. Jason Short exiting pits on Supers. Dave B Racing exiting pits on Supers. That Canadian guy exiting pits on Supers. Jason Short passed Dave B Racing for P1. Wyremew exiting pits on Supers. Chris Butt is 7th. The race dictator exiting pits on Supers. Chris Butt passed Johnny Prince for P6. Todd exiting pits on Supers. Johnny Prince exiting pits on Supers. That Canadian guy is P3. Wyremew is P4, 0.5 behind that Canadian guy. Wyremew was 6.1 faster last lap. Wyremew lost 5th to Chris Butt. That Canadian guy on lap 6 is P3, 1.0 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing on lap 6 is second, 0.5 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is third, 0.9 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing is P2 on Supers, 0.6 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is P3. Best lap is a 2:08.659. Dave B Racing on lap 7 is second, 0.5 ahead of that Canadian guy. 5 minutes remaining in the session. That Canadian guy is P3 on Supers, 0.7 behind Dave B Racing. That Canadian guy was 1.6 faster last lap. The race dictator is fourth, 2.6 behind that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is P3, 1.0 behind Dave B Racing. The race dictator is P4. Wiremu is P6, 0.3 ahead of Todd. Todd was 11.5 faster last lap. Todd from New Zealand on lap 7 is 7th on Supers, 0.4 behind Wiremu. Todd was 11.5 faster last lap. Wiremu on lap 7 is P6, 0.3 behind Chris Budd. Wiremu is now P7. Johnny Prince is 8th, 0.7 behind Wiremu. Dave B Racing is second, 3.3 behind Jason Short. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is P8, 1.8 behind Wiremu. Chris Budd is P6, 2.6 behind Todd. Johnny Prince is P8, 3.7 behind Wiremu. Dave B Racing is second, 3.5 behind Jason Short. Wyremew on lap 8 is 7th, 2.5 behind Chris Budd. Dave B Racing is P2, 3.7 behind Jason Short. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is P8, 3.8 behind Wyremew. Dave B Racing is P2. Best lap is a 2:09.348. 0.689 off the fastest lap. Johnny Prince is 8th, 2.1 behind Wyremew. Dave B Racing is P2, 2.2 behind Jason Short. The leader has just finished the race. Jason Short finished first. Dave B Racing finished second. The Race Dictator finished P3. That Canadian guy finished fourth. Todd finished P5. Chris Budd finished P6. Wyremew finished 7th. Johnny Prince finished 8th. Broadcast bot is P9. The race session is at RT Bathurst. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is P1 on Supers. Wiremu is P2 on Supers. Chris Butt from New Zealand is 3rd on Supers. 20 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. Chris Butt is now P4. That Canadian guy entering the pits is 8th. Chris Butt lost 5th to Jason Short. Todd is 2nd. The race dictator entering the pits is 8th. Johnny Prince is P3. Johnny Prince is now 2nd. The race session is at RT Bathurst. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is 8th on Supers. "20 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. Dave B Racing is P2. The race dictator from New Zealand is P3 on Supers. The race dictator passed Dave B Racing for P2. Dave B Racing from South Africa is P3 on Supers. That Canadian guy from Canada is 5th on Supers. Dave B Racing is P3. That Canadian guy is 5th. That Canadian guy lost P6 to Johnny Prince. Dave B Racing is P3. Chris Butt from New Zealand is P5 on Supers. Dave B Racing from South Africa is 3rd, 0.3 behind the race dictator. That Canadian guy from Canada is P7, 0.1 behind Johnny Prince. That Canadian guy passed Johnny Prince for 6th. Dave B Racing is P3, 0.5 behind the race dictator. Todd from New Zealand is 2nd on Supers, 1.0 behind the race dictator. That Canadian guy is 3rd, 1.0 behind Chris Butt. That Canadian guy passed Chris Butt for P2. Chris Butt is P2. 0.7 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is P3 on Supers, 0.9 behind Chris Budd. Chris Budd is second on Supers, 0.5 behind Todd. That Canadian guy is third. Best lap is a 2:20.138. 8.111 off the fastest lap. Chris Budd is P2, 0.3 ahead of that Canadian guy. Johnny Prince is second, battling Chris Budd. Chris Budd is third, 0.4 ahead of that Canadian guy. 15 minutes remaining in the session. Johnny Prince is second, 0.6 behind Todd. Chris Budd is third, 0.6 ahead of Dave B Racing. Johnny Prince on lap 3 is second, 0.8 behind Todd. Chris Budd is P3, 0.2 behind Johnny Prince. Johnny Prince is P5, battling Jason Short. Johnny Prince is now P3. Jason Short from New Zealand is P4 on Supers, 0.3 ahead of Wiremu. Wiremu is P4 on Supers, 0.6 ahead of that Canadian guy. The race dictator is P6, 0.3 behind Johnny Prince. Wiremu is fourth, 1.8 ahead of Johnny Prince. Wiremu lost fifth to the race dictator. The race dictator is P5, 0.6 behind Johnny Prince. Wiremu is P6, 0.8 behind the race dictator. The race dictator is P5, 0.5 behind Johnny Prince. The race dictator was 2.6 faster last lap. Dave B Racing is second, 0.4 behind Todd. Wiremu is 5th, 0.4 behind the race dictator. Johnny Prince is P8, 0.9 behind that Canadian guy. Wiremu is P5, 0.5 behind the race dictator. Chris Buddett is P7, 0.5 behind that Canadian guy. Johnny Prince is 8th, 0.5 behind Chris Buddett. Johnny Prince was 10.1 faster last lap. Chris Buddett on lap 4 is 7th, 0.5 behind that Canadian guy. Ten minutes remaining in the session. Jason Short is P3, 1.2 behind Dave B Racing. Jason Short was 2.0 faster last lap. That Canadian guy entering the pits is P8. Chris Buddett is 7th. Best lap is a 2:18.152. 8.794 off the fastest lap. That Canadian guy exiting pits on supers. Jason Short is P3, 1.0 behind Dave B Racing. Chris Buddett is P7, 0.3 behind Johnny Prince. Jason Short is P3. Best lap is a 2:09.358. Chris Buddett is P7 on supers, 0.2 behind Johnny Prince. Dave B Racing is P3, 0.1 behind Jason Short. Chris Buddett is P6, 1.0 ahead of Johnny Prince. Chris Buddett was 10.4 faster last lap. The race dictator entering the pits is 4th. Wiremu entering the pits is P5. Dave B Racing is 3rd. Chris Buddett from New Zealand is 6th, 1.2 ahead of Johnny Prince. Todd exiting pits on supers. Dave B Racing exiting pits on supers. The race dictator exiting pits on supers. The race dictator is 4th. Wiremu exiting pits on softs. Dave B Racing is 3rd, 0.6 ahead of the race dictator. Chris Buddett exiting pits on supers. Johnny Prince exiting pits on supers. The race dictator is P4, 2.1 behind Dave B Racing. Johnny Prince is P7. race dictator from New Zealand is P4, 2.7 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing was 2.2 faster last lap. Dave B Racing is third, 2.2 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator is P4. Best lap is a 2:09.990. 0.952 off the fastest lap. Johnny Prince is P7. Five minutes remaining in the session. The race dictator from New Zealand is P4, 2.8 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing is P3, 3.2 ahead of the race dictator. Johnny Prince is P7. The race dictator is P4, 5.0 behind Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing on lap 7 is P3, 4.0 behind Todd. Jason Short exiting pits on Supers. Todd is P2, 2.0 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing is P3, 0.5 behind Todd. Todd is P2. Best lap is a 2:10.241. 1.203 off the fastest lap. Dave B Racing is P3 on Supers, 0.8 behind Todd. The race dictator is 4th, 0.6 behind Dave B Racing. Todd is P2 on Supers, 0.9 behind Jason Short. Dave B Racing is 3rd, 0.2 behind Todd. Todd on lap 8 is P2, 0.3 behind Jason Short. Racing is P3, 0.5 behind Todd. Dave B Racing was 0.7 faster last lap. Todd is P2 on Supers, 0.2 ahead of Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing was 0.7 faster last lap. Dave B Racing is third, 0.2 behind Todd. Todd on lap 8 is P2, 0.1 ahead of Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing from South Africa is third, 0.2 behind Todd. Todd is P2, 0.3 ahead of Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing was 4.7 faster last lap. Dave B Racing is P3, 0.5 behind Todd. That Canadian guy is P3, 0.1 ahead of Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing is P4, 0.5 ahead of the Race Dictator. The Race Dictator was 3.3 faster last lap. That Canadian guy is third, 0.3 ahead of Dave B Racing. Dave B Racing is fourth, 0.4 behind that Canadian guy. The leader has just finished the race. Jason Short finished P1. Todd finished P2. That Canadian guy finished P3. Dave B Racing finished P4. The Race Dictator finished 5th. Johnny Prince finished P6. Chris Budd finished 7th.